Yo, what up? I got two more questions from my nearly infinite pile, dealing this time with matters of vegan ethics and effective activism in a democratic context from two very different angles. Haruki wrote to ask what I think about a current biotechnology, the ethics of a current biotechnology that grow human organs within the bodies of pigs. So technology of this kind has been around during my lifetime. I remember when the first shocking images were in the newspapers of a human ear being grown on the body of a rat, a lab rat. And the current method is reported as scientists growing human organs inside pigs by injecting human stem cells into pig embryos to produce human pig chimera embryos. The purpose of this video is not to discuss in detail the science behind this method. Now, Haruki sent this to me, and he was anticipating correctly that I would respond to this with horror. It is not a shocking new news story to me. As I say, technologies along these lines have been coming during my lifetime. I have read about broadly similar things before, although there are some details to this approach that are new to me in 2016. But I think Haruki is basically asking the question, shouldn't this be illegal? Because from a vegan perspective, it is immoral. Now, my answer may or may not surprise you based on how much you have been watching the videos on this channel. On a very deep level, I do not approach these matters in a dictatorial way. I do not look at morality as something that one person should decide at one time as a dictator, in the way that, in the Catholic Church, in theory, the Pope can issue a writ, the Pope can issue a resolution, and this is supposedly infallible and true for all time thereafter. Now, in reality, that's not even how the Catholic Church works, of course. But on a very deep level, I instead see public morality as something that can and should be debated by large numbers of people in an open-ended and ongoing process, even where I personally have a strongly held view. So this partly relates to the question of democracy, and it partly relates to the philosophy of knowledge supported by Karl Popper. Karl Popper is a modern philosopher, not an ancient one. But Karl Popper, put forward a theory of falsifiability of knowledge, which basically, there are many elements to it, but one important aspect of what he had to say about human knowledge is that it's important that we're honest with ourselves about why we believe things and what could prove us wrong. So in this case, this is the morality of exploiting pigs to grow human organs inside their bodies. Now, it does seem to me that this crosses the line, that this crosses every line, that this crosses a bunch of moral lines I'd never even imagined. To me, this seems morally wrong from A to Z. This seems completely immoral and unforgivable. But I recognize the limits of my own knowledge. I'm not an expert on this. Not at all. I've read this much about it. And there are other people who are experts. And I recognize that even though my feelings about this are strong, I could be proven wrong. I could learn more about this. Someone could explain something about this to me that really changes my mind. So I acknowledge the falsifiability of my own views, that my views are not divine, they aren't absolute, they're subject to change. And even if someone couldn't convince me of that today, maybe in time the facts themselves will change. Like maybe in the next 20 years the nature of this technology will change in such a way that I could be persuaded. Although, as I say, even though that's hard to imagine, I'm really insisting on the importance of that here. But as I've already alluded to, also, I do not think of myself as the Pope, neither of veganism, nor of what law and morality should be in Canada, nor what law and morality should be in the whole world. I really think that there should be a public discourse where the people who are experts on this issue have the opportunity to convince me, to convince my fellow rational human beings, and where ultimately there's some kind of a vote to decide it. Now, the ultimate example of this, especially in Canada, is the question of the morality of abortion. It's still debated in Canada, but ultimately in Canada, the morality of abortion, but the legality of abortion, was decided by a referendum. So anytime the government doesn't want to deal with it, all they have to say is, look, we had a referendum. The people decided. And, I do think the question can be asked repeatedly. You can't have the same referendum every 5 years, but whatever. Every 25 years, if you want to, you can have a referendum on that issue. And it's certainly a wonderful luxury to feel that you live in a country where you respect the majority of voters enough that issues like that can be debated, discussed, and decided through a democratic plebiscite. Let's say you live in a country where the majority of people are devout Catholics. Do you believe that a referendum can decide gay rights? And, you guys have already guessed, if you haven't heard me say it 100 times, I support equal rights for gays, etc. I do. But if I live in a country where that's a minority view, what's the road ahead? Is the road ahead for an unpopular minority to seize control of the government and to enforce legislation that's wildly unpopular with the vast majority of people? Or is there a road ahead that convinces the majority of the public, look, even though you may be a devout Catholic, I need you to respect this as a principle of human rights that improves lives for your fellow men and that improves our society as a whole? Because there are many things that I may disagree with personally that nevertheless may improve society as a whole. Another debatable example, should gambling be legal or illegal? For me personally, I feel totally comfortable with gambling being illegal, 100% illegal. I feel that way. But I want to live in a society where that's not decided by one dictator, by one papal figure, or it's not decided by one matter of principle handed down by a king or dictator for all time. And I can recognize that I might be proven wrong. Maybe if people who have real expertise and have really studied the issue, the social impacts of gambling, maybe they can put together a very convincing argument that, there's harm and there are also benefits, and that for us to all live together as a society, really, I should be tolerant towards gambling, and that legalization of gambling is an okay thing for society as a whole. Maybe I can be convinced of that. Maybe the majority of people in my society can be convinced of that. But maybe that process has a kind of value that's more important than what I think or what you think. So I think those questions are really of tremendous fundamental importance, even when I'm looking something as horrifying as growing human organs inside the body of a pig. Do I think it's morally wrong? Yes, I think it's unforgivable. I think it's an abomination. But I don't think my opinion counts for much. And I think nobody on the planet should ever wear alligator boots again. Boots made out of the skin of alligator. I just see no reason. I see no moral justification for why that should exist. There's no technological need for it. There's no medical need for it. There's no social benefit for it. Obviously, by contrast, there must be some benefit, to human health to doing these terrible things to pigs, right? So I can't even get the majority of people to agree with me that we can get rid of something that is just created for vanity, has zero practical use, like alligator boots or ostrich boots, killing an ostrich to make a pair of boots out of it, when technologically there's absolutely no need for it. There's no benefit publicly or what have you. So obviously there's an uphill battle we're looking at whenever we look at questions of exploiting animals for medical research or for actual medical treatment. So if you live in a society where fur and leather, where you can't even convince 10% of the population to abolish those things when there's no benefit, you have to recognize, the depth and the length of the struggle to getting people on your side and motivated to care about animal rights when respecting animal rights really will cost them something. Okay, that's enough for that one. So about effective activism and organizing vegans, Mike on Raw writes to ask me, when we look at ways to spread veganism, Mike on Raw, he has his own YouTube channel, so that's not his real name, that's his YouTube channel's name. You can check him out. He says, when we look at ways to spread veganism, ways to make a difference, if there is a large group that already exists, an organized group, and that has a community, that already have offices, that already have organization, and so on, is there value in trying to work inside the group and to help them become not only better as the group that they are, but a vegan version of the group that they are? So whether that's within Mothers Against Drunk Driving, or let's say, he doesn't give it as an example, what if it's a wilderness conservation society of forming a vegan, as a vegan, infiltrating an existing wilderness conservation society, instead of trying to set up your own thing. Now, to be honest with you, we're basically talking about a Western democratic political context here. No, actually, I don't think that's going to be effective. And I do think, we talk about this in a relaxed, down-to-earth way on this channel right now, but I also talk about on this channel the ways in which veganism is shocking and is emotionally disturbing for vegans themselves. For your parents, if your parents still eat meat and they have to confront their own kid about these issues all of a sudden. Veganism, like, if we're being honest about it, veganism tears families apart. Husbands who divorce their wives over veganism exists. Parents who hate their kids and kids who hate their parents. It actually is something tremendously acrimonious for a lot of us in our personal lives. And it is such a fundamental question of ethics that does impact us at least 3 meals a day every day. And it impacts the couch you're sitting on, whether or not you're sitting on a leather couch, whether or not you're wearing a leather wristband for your watch, and all these small things. I do think that the nature of the challenge to modernity posed by veganism is so fundamental and is so uncomfortable for people to deal with that you cannot just slide into an existing wilderness conservation group like the Sierra Club or like the Green Party in Canada or Ducks Unlimited, the wetland preservation. I do not think you can just form a vegan cell within those organizations and expect them to move in your direction. I think you can set up separate vegan foundations and then collaborate with and cooperate with meat-eating foundations. And the advantage of that, of having a separate organization, is that then the nature of the collaboration and cooperation is explicit. So you're writing down on a piece of paper, look, we appreciate that you guys do habitat conservation, but you guys also engage in hunting. And you guys also, for fundraisers, sell hamburgers and hot dogs. That may not sound like a small thing, but on a practical level, if you join a group, even it's a cancer charity, but there they are actually selling hamburgers as part of their fundraiser. For you as a vegan, can you participate in that? It's wrong on so many levels. It's bad for the animals. It's bad for the people who are eating the animals. It's bad for ecology. The nature of the ethical compromise on a daily basis of being in a meat-eating charity of any kind, again, in the kind of cultural context we're talking about here, no, it is very, very difficult for me to imagine that working for everything from the fundraising to the practice itself. But if you do have a separate organization, then I think the question of actually having an explicitly written cooperation agreement where you talk to another group and say, look, we're vegan, you're not. We understand that. We hope you respect our position. Here's what we have in common. What we have in common is habitat conservation. What we have in common is we're trying to improve the water quality in a specific river. And we as vegans, we're really interested in the pollution caused by the meatpacking industry or by the animal agriculture that's on this river. And you as a separate foundation, you have some different priorities, different agenda, but we can cooperate on some issues, and here it is. I think that working that out explicitly can be tremendously positive. But otherwise, if you try to let it be an unstated and implicit issue where you're working inside another foundation, I think the acrimony and the agony day to day is just going to be impossible. And that's the sense in which veganism is an identity and is like identity politics. If we were talking about gay rights, do you need to have a separate gay rights foundation, or can you, as a gay person, work inside a homophobic organization, an organization that is, that may sound ridiculous. Back in the 1970s, it wasn't ridiculous. And back in the 1970s, not that long ago, the vast majority of the big charities were homophobic and often might have a stated rule that they don't employ people who openly admit that they're gay or things like that. And they may be charities accomplishing good things, but that openly say they they have homophobic mandates and homophobic issues. Obviously, I mean, some gay people did. There were plenty of gay people in the closet who engaged in charity work and political work of different kinds inside homophobic organizations. However, you could never get those organizations to transform themselves into gay rights organizations that way. No, you needed to have separate, self-identified gay rights organizations. And as I've mentioned many, many times lately, often you had much more specific organizations, not just gay rights in general, a specific gay group, a group of gay professionals. It could indeed be gay architects who want to be out of the closet, who want to be recognized as such, even though architecture is not linked to homosexuality. But say, look, we want to have a foundation that gives us a voice, makes us visible, gives us a presence. So it could be specific sexual minorities within gay rights movement, but it could be specific professions, specific special interests. And, there can be a kind of strength in the cohesiveness and passion you have with those highly focused organizations. Because again, once we're into real activism, there's no money involved, there's no fame, there's none of this BS that we have on YouTube motivating people to act the way they act and to do the things they do. Okay, guys, another, I hope, useful discussion for some of you. We've just answered 2 questions in 16 minutes. Thanks all for tuning in.